So as far as treatment updates, there's one drug that has been approved for emergency use authorization. That is remdesivir. It is an RNA polymerase inhibitor. And what it does, it terminates viral RNA transcription. And if you look at the studies of remdesivir, some of them may not all of them show clinical benefit. So the first one, the one that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed compassionate use of remdesivir led to clinical improvement in 68%. Important thing to remember, there was no control group in this particular study. Yes, there's 68%, but you can't really compare with the other group. And then the study that was used to give this emergency use authorization is a study led by the NIH, and this is when they gave, this is called the ACT trial. It's a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial where patients were given 200 milligrams of remdesivir on day 1 and then 100 milligrams Q24 for a 10-day total. And the participant outcome was measured at day 15 to see their clinical outcome. During the preliminary analysis, so the Data Safety Monitoring Board interim analysis of this study showed that by day 15, the patients or the participants who received remdesivir compared to placebo had an earlier time to recovery. So 11 days versus 15 days, this was found to be statistically significant. And also the survival benefit was better, with a mortality of 8% in those who received remdesivir and 11.6. Again, this is preliminary study, but based on these the results of this interim analysis, they were able to say that we can give it as emergency use authorization. As far as adverse events, they were similar between the placebo group and the remdesivir group. Most were seen, and this was just recently published in the New England Journal, where they showed it was typically anemia, acute kidney injury, and elevation of transaminases. Another trial looked at this, and this is from Lancet, which showed that the treatment was not associated with statistically significant clinical benefits as well. So again, there are differences in the results of these studies, but the FDA allowed for emergency use based on that NIH clinical trial or the antibody. Now, what are the other drugs that are being used? Hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin has gotten a lot of press recently because of this. Now, remember, there are ongoing randomized clinical trials that are being done, not just for treatment, but also in prophylaxis. There was a paper that just got published, I think, yesterday, which was a registry analysis, a multinational analysis of individuals or patients who receive hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine with or without azithromycin. And in this particular paper, again, this is not a randomized clinical trial study, but it was an analysis of people who received it. They found out that those individuals who received hydroxychloroquine or azithromycin had there were higher rates of arrhythmias in these patients. And also at the same time, there was decreased hospital survival. So again, this is a study that was just published, but one thing you need to consider, it wasn't a randomized study, so we're still ongoing clinical trials to see whether it is beneficial. Though in that particular study, they corrected for comorbidities and all of that. But one thing that, when I was reading the paper, you would think of, so if those individuals who come into the hospital, the ones who are sicker are maybe the ones that are being given the hydroxychloroquine, so there may be a bit of a bias that's there. But I'm sure that those are some of the issues that we will be able to address with randomized clinical trials. The other the drug is lopinavir, or lopinavir, ritonavir, Kaletra. If you remember, an HIV medication. There was a study that was done. It was a randomized open label trial. This did not show any clinical benefit. So what is the IDSA guidelines regarding treatment? They said that the use of these agents, hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, and some other anti-inflammatory medications could be used only in the context of a clinical trial, just because of possible harm that can happen when patients take these medications. Next slide. So what is in the pipeline? Small molecules, again, there's another RNA-dependent RNA polymerase inhibitor similar to remdesivir. These are some of the things that are being studied right now. Neutralizing antibodies, again, so new antibodies does not necessarily mean that there's protective immunity, but there are neutralizing antibodies that are being studied right now, an infusion of these antibodies among people who are infected with SARS coronavirus 2 may be helpful and may help with clinical outcome. Convalescent plasma, again, a number of studies happening in different centers, including our center here in Pittsburgh, looking at convalescent plasma. There was anecdotal evidence. There was a preprint. I didn't put it here because it was still a preprint, but it showed that convalescent plasma was safe, and this is with experience with an N of 5,000. So hopefully that's going to be published soon, and it would show that convalescent plasma is safe. Whether it is effective, we would still need more data to look at that. But initial anecdotal evidence showed some improvement. And then the next is host-directed anti-inflammatory. So we have drugs that are focusing on the virus, but at the same time, and this will be discussed in the next speaker, there is an increase in inflammation, the cytokine storm that people are talking about. And so part of the treatment or the management of patients with COVID-19 is to be able to address this inflammation. And so you will see other medications or drugs that are being evaluated for COVID-19, anti-IL-6 like tocilizumab and sarilumab, anti-TNF and flexitide. So these are medications that are being used with rheumatologic diseases. And anti-IL-1 beta, which is canakinumab, and even anakinra, which is a receptor antagonist, and then anti-Janus kinase. So these have been used for autoimmune diseases, are now being looked at for treatment of COVID-19. And then supportive, and this will be mentioned again in the next presentation, where there is increase in coagulopathies in patients or thrombosis, PEs among people or patients that have COVID-19. And so people are also looking at supportive therapies like low molecular weight heparin and dipyridamole as a possible management strategy for patients with COVID-19. Next slide. Now we'll look at vaccines, something that we're all very excited to find out about. So most of these vaccines are targeting the S protein, as I showed you in the previous slide. So the virus has this S protein. It's very important because this S protein is what allows it to bind and enter into the host cell. When they looked at studies with SARS coronavirus 1, which was in the early 2000s, they looked at patients who recovered. And when they looked at sera from convalescent SARS coronavirus 1 patients that exhibited, they recovered, they had a lot of this neutralizing antibodies. And these neutralizing antibodies were largely directed towards the S protein. And they also lasted for more than a year. That's why in all of these vaccine strategies that you're seeing right now, most of them are directed towards the S protein, because that is what has been shown to have high titers of antibodies that are formed, at the same time neutralizing antibodies that are being formed. And there are multiple types of vaccines that are being used. You have the live attenuated virus, as you see here, inactivated virus, you have RNA, DNA viruses, and they also use viral vectors, looking at like adenovirus and adenovirus or chimp adenovirus vectors. And some of these are now in phase 1, others have moved into phase 2. What data do we have on this? So there is the Oxford vaccine that you probably read about, which is a vaccine using chimp adenovirus vector that has shown protection in non-human primates and macaques. There's another adenovirus vector that's studied by Beth Israel, Deaconess, and Johnson & Johnson that also has been shown to protect macaques. So what we're going into right now would be a bigger N for these vaccines. So we're going on to phase 2 studies. Based on these initial studies, it's promising, but again, before these can be rolled out and that people can receive these vaccines, it's important to show safety, right? And so we need to have these phase 1, phase 2 studies to show that these vaccines are safe before they can be implemented, that people can receive these vaccines. And I think that's it. I'll just acknowledge some of my colleagues here in Pitt for helping out with the data that I presented. Thank you so much.